For nearly 2 decades, we were required to take annual courses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They told us these were essential part of the company's culture, mandatory because those values were necessary for coexistence, for building a respectful workplace. They sent us reminders, automated messages, summoned us if we didn't complete them, told us that commitment was everyone's responsibility. The Human Resources Department was relentless. They were always watching. They warned you. They tracked you. You took the course, passed it, checked the box, and became part of that massive machine that said diversity mattered. Over and over again, year after year. A global compliance structure that told us our existence as trans and non-binary people had a place, even if it was conditional, symbolic, functional. At the same time, many of those who worked or still work in human resources filled their LinkedIn profiles with posts about inclusion. They shared articles, posted reflections, raised their voices in the name of equity. They turned the language of diversity into personal branding. They used our struggles as platforms for career advancement. They talked about corporate culture as if it were a moral doctrine, as if sharing a link or posting a photo from a pride event made them ethical people. They presented themselves as agents of change, as if being a good person could be proven with one monthly post about human rights. And the most perverse part is that many of these people truly believed their own narrative. They thought they were part of something just, and they sold it as such. Diversity was the language you had to speak if you wanted to move up, work in a multinational, or project social awareness. Then came 2025, and Donald Trump came, and his administration eliminated in one stroke all diversity, equity, and inclusion policies within the government. It erased the mentions, shut down the programs, cut the resources, removed trans and non-binary people from institutional language, made us non-existent in documents, reports, and statistics. It wasn't an ideological decision. It was a systematic strategy of symbolic eradication, an erasure by omission. Then, like a domino effect, many international companies began quietly withdrawing those mandatory courses they had enforced for 20 years. Without explanation, without announcement, they simply removed them. They vanished, as if they had never existed, as if those words, those promises, those policies had been a temporary mistake. But the most revealing part wasn't the disappearance of the courses. The most devastating part was the silence. Suddenly, all those people who talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion went silent. They stopped speaking. There were no protest posts, no statements, no messages expressing regret about the disappearance of those programs. No one explained anything. No one complained. No one said it was shameful. No one denounced the setback. The very same people who for 2 decades demanded, promoted, enforced, and celebrated those courses were now silent. And with that silence, they sealed their betrayal. They confirmed that they never believed in anything they said, that they did it because it was required, because it earned them points, because it sold well, because it was part of the acceptable values package in the global job market. But not because they cared about what happened to us, not because our lives meant anything to them. And it's not that they've completely withdrawn. Some still post. Some still share a link, a motivational phrase, a stock photo from some diversity event. But now they do it in fear. Many who still share content about inclusion are being blocked, isolated, disconnected, because others are afraid to be associated with a discourse that is no longer politically profitable. And the most chilling part is that many of those who block are cisgender gay men, people who directly benefited from the normalization process, but who now distance themselves to protect their status, because it doesn't affect them, because their identity has been assimilated, because their place is no longer in dispute. So they prefer silence. They prefer not to take risks. They prefer that we are erased, as long as they keep their jobs, their careers, their networks. The silence of cisgender gay men is even more unforgivable, because they owe us a lot, too much. The right to marry, to appear in media without being ridiculed, to hold public office, to be accepted at work, to have legal representation. All that was made possible because trans people existed, resisted, showed up, faced repression, endured marginalization, exposed ourselves when they were still silent. They came later. They arrived after the first cracks had been opened, when the door had already been forced, when there was already a language. And now, when they want to erase us again, not only do they not defend us, they abandon us. They look at us with distance, with shame, as if our presence compromised them, as if we were a burden, an obstacle, an uncomfortable reminder of what they once were before being accepted. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm not speaking metaphorically. This is a rollback of more than 30 years in the most cruel and literal sense. We've returned to marginalization, to institutional silence, to medical, social, and legal denial. We are no longer mentioned, no longer named. We no longer exist, and no one seems shocked. No one seems to consider this a tragedy. No statements, no campaigns, no alliances. The courses vanished. The policies were erased. The compliance structures dissolved. And those who for years portrayed themselves as our allies, as our defenders, now act as if nothing happened, as if they had never said anything, as if they never knew us. And the most disturbing part is that they still act like good people, as if their current silence didn't make them complicit, as if their inaction wasn't a form of violence, as if they hadn't actively taken part in the dismantling by omission. Because that's what's happening. We are being erased. And not through explicit laws, but through a more efficient mechanism to stop naming us, to stop including us, to stop educating, to stop training, to stop speaking, forgetting as policy, omission as a form of eradication. When a structure like human resources insists for 2 decades that diversity, equity, and inclusion are essential principles, it cannot then withdraw in silence without acknowledging that it is destroying precisely what it once claimed to defend. But that's exactly what is happening. A silent withdrawal without explanations, without resistance, without guilt. A cowardly retreat disguised as neutrality. There are no more articles about inclusion, no more promotion of continuous training, no more oversight of any policy. It's over. And they don't even bother to justify it. The absence of explanation is, in itself, a message. It no longer matters. And the most terrifying part isn't just that we've been left alone. It's that many of these people who once presented themselves as change leaders now behave as if speaking about inclusion were a risk. As if acknowledging our existence could stain them. They have internalized the new order. They accept it. They follow it. They validate it through obedience. They reinforce it with passivity. Because to uphold a structure of exclusion, you don't only need an oppressor. You need a mass of comfortable people who prefer silence to challenging power. Many of them know exactly what is happening. They know about the layoffs, the internal policies that have changed, the systematic removal of any reference to trans and non-binary people in recruitment processes, in training, in internal communications. But they choose to stay silent. And that silence is not just cowardice. It's calculation. It's convenience. It's a strategy to preserve their place in a system that has once again turned hostile toward us. A system that now rewards conformity, obedience, neutrality. A system that no longer wants diversity, but rather an illusion of order and purity. Meanwhile, we become the easy target again. Not because we did anything, not because we failed, but because our very existence exposes the falsehood of the normality they want to impose. Because we don't fit. Because we don't obey the binary. Because we don't give them the comfort of the predictable. So they silence us, exclude us, ignore us. And the same people who once mentioned us in their professional profiles now erase us from their discourse. As if deleting our names from a corporate document could also erase our humanity. But the most repugnant part is the betrayal by those who shared in the benefits with us. Those who called themselves allies. Those who said our struggle was theirs too. those who marched beside us when the cameras were on. They now turn their backs on us. They observe us from the comfort they have secured and decide it's not worth risking what they have. They prefer their silence to our dignity. They prefer being tolerated by the powerful over standing with us in the margins. They cling to a position won through our struggle and use it against us. They expel us from the very discourse we helped to build. All of this reveals that what was once said about inclusion was a lie. Not a mistake. Not a delusion. A deliberate lie. They used our language, our stories, our bodies to construct a corporate narrative that allowed them to profit from the appearance of justice. They sold it as organizational culture, but it was marketing. It was image. It was a bubble that burst as soon as the political winds shifted. And now they leave us where we were 30 or 40 years ago. Alone, vulnerable, invisible. But this time it's even crueler. Because it's not about unknowingly returning to the past. It's about returning with full awareness. It's about a system that learned the language of inclusion only to gut it more efficiently when it no longer served. It's about companies that pretended to learn so they could later destroy more effectively. It's about HR professionals who built entire careers on a lie and now, by staying silent, confirm what they always were. Gears in a control mechanism, not justice. And while they reposition themselves, while they clean their profiles and adjust their discourse to the new regime, we continue to exist. We continue to be uncomfortable. We continue to be what they want to erase. But we will not disappear just because they go silent. We will not accept a return to silence. We will not tolerate those who used us now acting as if they never knew us. We are not surprised that many of these people still talk about professional ethics while silently assisting in a systematic process of elimination. They are the same ones who repeat prefabricated phrases about good leadership, organizational culture, or sense of belonging, but don't have the minimum courage to name what is happening. They talk about transparency when it's convenient, about empathy when it's safe, about social responsibility when there's budget to pretend. But when facing a direct attack on trans and non-binary people, their integrity disappears. They don't take risks. Not even a sentence, not a line, not a gesture, not a simple "this is wrong." This abandonment is not passive. It's active. It's not just about failing to speak out. It's about maintaining workplace structures that have been adjusted to exclude us, to make us invisible, to roll back every gain that was achieved. Because right now, there are HR departments designing hiring processes that no longer include neutral language. There are internal policies that erase references to gender identity. There are manuals reverting to binary norms without explanation. And those implementing these changes do so with the same efficiency with which they previously enforced mandatory inclusion training. They are the same people. Only the direction has changed. The efficiency remains. The conviction never existed. What exists now is a neat submission to the new paradigm disguised as professionalism. They continue to follow orders, apply procedures, act as if they are neutral. But there is no neutrality in a structure that excludes. No professionalism in a policy that erases human beings. No ethics in a corporate culture that adjusts its message based on the political climate. There is complicity. There is calculation. There is cowardice. Meanwhile, we continue to pay the price. We face interviews where hiding our identity is a survival strategy. Forms that do not allow us to name ourselves. Companies that have chosen to return to a time when trans people were neither desirable nor visible. And all of this happens while their HR departments present themselves as guarantors of diversity of thought or safe environments. It is intolerable cynicism. Violence disguised as normality. And it's not only about what they do to us. It's also about what they do to others by making them believe this is normal. That it's okay to stay silent. That it's okay to adapt. That it's okay to pretend no one disappeared. Everyone who now silently observes this exclusion process is learning that truth doesn't matter, that principles are negotiable, that fear rules. A generation of professionals is being trained to obey without thinking, to accommodate the power in charge, to stay silent in the face of injustice if that guarantees stability. A culture of abandonment is being built, and in that abandonment we are left alone again. But this time it's not because there's no language, no history, no examples. This time all of that exists. What's missing is courage. What's missing is humanity. What's missing is integrity. Because those who remain silent today know exactly what they're doing. And they do it anyway. Because they think no one will remember. Because they believe that when this all passes, they'll be able to resume their inclusion discourse without anyone holding them accountable. Because they assume that forgetting will protect them. It won't. We will not forget who they were. We will not forget who let us fall. We will not allow them to raise flags again that they refused to defend when it mattered. Because when a community's dignity is being destroyed in real time, silence is participation. Disappearing is executing. Omitting is legitimizing. Some try to justify their silence with technical arguments. They say they can't speak because they're in mid-level roles. That they don't have real power. That it's not their responsibility. That they don't want to lose their job. But that rationalization is as cowardly as it is false. Because they did have power. They had it when they pressured employees to complete diversity training. When they selected candidates and defined internal policies. When they portrayed themselves as leaders of cultural change. And they still have it now, only now they choose to use it to protect themselves, not to protect anyone else. This shift in position reveals that it was never about values. It was about obedience. And now they obey a new order, to eliminate every trace of what was once called inclusion. They do it in stages, without scandal, without visible conflict. A silent erasure, advancing steadily and without opposition. Every form that reverts to binary checkboxes, every piece of content that disappears from the intranet, every training that's no longer offered, is another piece in the erasure process. A meticulous, planned, institutional process. And those carrying it out no longer feel the need to justify anything, because the environment assures them there will be no consequences, that the new dominant discourse legitimizes their omission, that the cost of excluding trans and non-binary people has disappeared, that silence is not only acceptable, it is expected,